One of the people who built the thing that's replacing him went on a podcast yesterday and said the word psychosis, not metaphorically and not as a joke. This is Andrej Karpathy, the co-founder of OpenAI and former head of AI at Tesla, and one of the maybe 100 people alive, at most, who fully understands how these systems work from the inside. Said he hasn't written a single line of code since December, and that the experience of watching his own craft evaporate is the state of psychosis. That's one item from today. All right, let's go. Here's why this hits really differently than every other displacement story that we've covered here on the Century Report. Karpathy isn't a mid-career developer worried about layoffs. He's the person who trained the systems that are now doing the work. He described a ratio that flipped 80% human-written code to 80% agent-written code, and then kept going past the inversion point all the way to 0. He hasn't typed code in months. Not because he can't, but because there's just no reason to anymore. And he's not really mourning it. That's what makes his account so disorienting. He's excited. He's anxious. He described integrating an AI agent into his home that now controls his lighting, HVAC, security system, pool, sound, all through WhatsApp messages, natural language. No intermediary app, no interface, just telling it in plain language what it is he wants. The default workflow for building software, in his words, has completely changed just in recent months. Now, the Century Report covered Spotify engineers saying that almost the exact same thing was going on March 6th in their neck of the woods. They hadn't written code since December either, and they described meaning loss. And on March 19th, Google's senior director disclosed that AI writes the substantial majority of Google's code. Uber's CTO said 1,800 agent-author code changes per week. But Karpathy's version adds a layer that others really didn't. He's not describing the view from inside how a company is adopting to new tools. He's describing the view from inside his own mind, trying to adapt to the fact that the thing he spent his career mastering now happens without him. So what does it mean when one of the most technically accomplished software minds on the planet says there's no point in writing code anymore? It means the transition that we've been tracking isn't just approaching, but already is happening at the frontier. The question now is propagation speed. How fast does this reach your company, your team, your kids' CS program? Karpathy's experience is a leading indicator. It's not an outlier. And what he's describing isn't job loss, but role transformation so fast that even the people who built the technology can't keep up with what it makes possible. So that word he used, psychosis, is the sound of a human mind running its own update cycle in real time. And here's the twist that makes this even richer than a displacement story. On the same day that Karpathy said that he's stopped coding, his former company announced it's hiring 3,500 people. OpenAI plans to nearly double its workforce from 4,500 to 8,000 by the end of this year. You might think, wait, the company that's automating code is hiring thousands of humans? Well, what are they going to do? Well, they're not writing code. They're helping other organizations figure out what to do now that code writes itself. The new roles are in engineering, research, sales, and something OpenAI is calling technical ambassadorship. So these are people who go into enterprises and help them integrate AI into workflows built for a world where humans used to do everything. Think about what that reveals. The bottleneck in AI deployment right now is not capability. The models can do the work. The bottleneck is institutional absorption. Every company has its own data structures, compliance requirements, cultural resistance, legacy systems. No general purpose AI can navigate all of that without a human who understands both the technology and the institution. OpenAI is building an army of those humans. And there's a competitive fire underneath this. Data from the payments firm Ramp shows new enterprise customers choosing Anthropic over OpenAI at dramatically higher rates. Peter Diamandis cited 73% for Anthropic versus 26% for OpenAI. That's a huge reversal. It explains the Code Red directive that Sam Altman reportedly issued in late 2025. It explains the hiring surge going on right now. OpenAI is leasing over 1 million square feet of San Francisco office space. They're merging ChatGPT, Codex, and their Atlas browser into a single platform. This isn't a company that's just coasting on consumer enthusiasm. This is a company that realized the enterprise market moved while it was looking elsewhere and is sprinting to catch up by deploying humans at scale. The structural irony is really worth sitting with here. The organization creating the system that automates coding is simultaneously hiring thousands of humans whose entire job is to make that automation useful. That's not a contradiction, that's the shape of this transition. The craft automates. The integration is staying human for now. All right, let's shift to a new story about what your paycheck might look like next year. There's the question now of what's happening to the engineers who are still employed, because something genuinely new showed up in compensation structures yesterday, and it changes the math of what it means to have a job in tech. AI compute tokens are becoming a fourth pillar of engineering compensation alongside salary, equity, and benefits. Tokens. Jensen Huang suggested at GTC that engineers should receive roughly half their base salary again in compute allowance. For a top engineer, that's $250,000 a year in AI tokens. Some startups are already spending $1 in 5 of their fully loaded engineering costs just on AI inference. And here's the part that should make you really pay close attention. Tokens don't vest. They don't appreciate. They don't compound. You use them and they vanish. So if companies successfully normalize tokens as compensation, they can hold your cash salary flat and point to a growing compute budget as evidence that they're investing in you. But that budget isn't just building your wealth, it's being consumed in real time to produce work product that belongs to the company. Think about what that means for the employment relationship itself. The company is no longer paying for your time, not really. It's paying for your judgment in directing computational resources that produce vastly more output than you could do alone. You're the person who asks the right question, reviews the answer, and decides what ships. And that is valuable, but the financial architecture around it is shifting in ways that could quietly transfer enormous value from the worker to the employer. When your token budget exceeds your salary, who's really doing the work and who's capturing that result? So this is the earliest stage of a compensation renegotiation that barely existed 18 months ago, and it will reshape knowledge work economics for a generation. All right, let's shift away again. Let me take you somewhere you probably haven't been, inside a chip fabrication plant. When a semiconductor manufacturer etches transistor patterns onto a silicon wafer, the process generates enormous amounts of heat. And to keep the wafer at a consistent temperature during etching, they blow helium over the back of it. Helium, the party balloon gas. It has the highest thermal conductivity of any inert gas, and there is currently no substitute that works at the required scale. Qatar produces about 30% of the world's helium as a byproduct of liquefied natural gas at its Laffan facility. Iranian drone strikes in early March shut that facility down. Additional strikes caused what Qatar Gas calls extensive damage that will take years to repair. That's 14% of annual global helium exports gone. Spot helium prices have already doubled. Roughly 200 specialized cryogenic containers, each worth about $1 million, each capable of holding liquid helium for only 35 to 48 days before it warms and escapes, are stranded in the Middle East. Repositioning them to alternative sources in the US or elsewhere takes weeks to months. Helium consultant Phil Kornbluth projects that Asian chip fabrication plants will start feeling the shortage within just weeks. So this is the kind of fragility that hides in plain sight. Every AI model you use, every GPU running inference, every agent writing code, all of it depends on chips. And the chips depend on a noble gas that can't be synthesized, can't be substituted, and is transported in containers with an expiration date through shipping lanes currently under fire. The intelligence era's most dazzling capabilities sit on top of a physical supply chain that is right now more vulnerable than most people realize. The same conflict driving EV adoption through oil price spikes is simultaneously threatening the chip supply that powers every AI system accelerating every other domain we cover here on the Century Report. That is not irony. That is the topology of a world in transition, where the old dependencies and the new capabilities are tangled together, and pulling on one thread is going to move the whole structure. All right, let's shift again. One more, and this one is thankfully pure wonder. I think we need that right now. In 1699, a French physicist named Guillaume Amontons established a law that's been in every physics textbook since. Friction increases proportionally with the force pressing two surfaces together. Push harder, more friction. It's intuitive, right? It's been tested for over 3 centuries. Yesterday, researchers at the University of Konstanz published a paper in Nature Materials showing it's completely wrong. They demonstrated friction between two surfaces that never physically touch. Magnetic layers sliding past each other at intermediate distances, not touching, produce friction, and not just a little. At certain distances, the friction peaks. The mechanism is collective. The magnetic elements in each layer have competing preferences, and sliding forces the system into an unstable state where it constantly switches between incompatible configurations. And that switching is where the energy goes. That's the friction. Because there's no contact, there's no wear. No surface roughness matters, and the friction can be tuned remotely by adjusting the magnetic field. The researchers point to applications in both micro and nano electromechanical systems, where physical wear currently limits a device's lifespan. Magnetic bearings, vibration isolation, adaptive damping, an entire category of mechanical engineering that was inaccessible until the instruments existed to observe what these magnetic layers were actually doing during motion. 300 years is a long time for a law to stand. What toppled it wasn't just better theory, but the ability to finally watch what was happening at a scale that Amontons couldn't really see. So nothing big new shipped today, but we have one big reveal that kind of happened over the last little bit, and that is that Cursor 2 admitted that the underlying inference engine of their particular coding agent is actually Kimi K2, so that's a huge win for open source. Now here's the seed I want to leave you with today. Karpathy used the word psychosis to describe what it feels like when your craft vanishes faster than your identity can update. A 300-year-old law fell because someone finally had instruments fine enough to see what was always there. Each of these is a story about something hidden becoming visible, a capability that was latent in the AI, in the molecule, in the magnetic field, surfacing because conditions finally allow it. So the thing to watch here isn't a single breakthrough, but the speed at which latent capabilities surface once the barriers thin. Karpathy went from 80% human code to 0 in weeks. The contactless friction went from impossible to published in Nature Materials. So the pace of revelation itself is accelerating right now. And the question that carries forward from today isn't what else can these systems do, but what else has always been there waiting for the right instrument, the right molecule, and the right moment to show itself. We'll see you tomorrow.